Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm Mark Oppenheimer, and I'm here with AJU Open from American Jewish University, and I'm talking to my good friend Roya Hakakian, and we're going to talk about anti-Semitism from Iran to the United States and from the past to the present. Roya is the author of a number of books and another one forthcoming, and I think one of the more incisive commentators about really the question of the place of Jews in the modern world. And it's such an honor to have her here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I want to start by asking about an anecdote that you've shared with me in the past, but I think it'll be interesting to hear you talk about it now, because the last time we talked about what happened at your children's school was before October 7th, before the Hamas attacks of 2023. It was before all the encampments that occurred on American college campuses, protests throughout the world, pro-Israel, anti-Israel. And it's a small anecdote set here in New Haven that actually I think ends up speaking to a lot of much bigger things. So would you tell us what that story was that happened at your children's elementary school?
Sure. So I think ever since I arrived in the United States, I found myself asleep until I woke up twice. The first time was at 9/11, when I suddenly realized that the Islamists I had fled had come to the country that I thought was inaccessible and would never be a target, or they would never reach it. So that was the first time that I thought I woke up all of a sudden, and I recognized that the distant thing that I thought I had put behind me had reached these shores that I thought were not reachable. Then the second time, it was in a very strange but small incident at the foot school where my kids were students in the first year of junior high school. The school, some of you may remember, was run by an Israeli principal. So there was no shortage of Jews or people who really understood the Jewish issue and the Jewish predicament there. And the student body was also, I'd say, far above 25% Jewish. And of course, one of the most well-educated communities in all of New England. So, I was in my second dream thinking, whatever bad things that my father used to talk about growing up in Iran as a child, or a few things that I experienced myself would never be my children's reality. Until one day, we heard that there was a swastika in the bathroom, the boys' bathroom in the junior high school division. And it was shocking, and not only that there was a swastika at all, but there was this swastika at this posh private school that we never thought a swastika would have a place in. And so I thought that everything would be taken incredibly seriously, in the same way that a racial incident would have been taken really seriously. I don't need to give you examples of what those racial incidents would be, but we all know how seriously schools in general take those examples. But what happened, which was shocking but also an awakening of sorts for me, was that the swastika was immediately erased, right? Which, I don't know, we can discuss that. I thought was the wrong thing to do. You don't immediately erase the swastika. You use it to generate conversation. You use it to, bring the kids by and discuss it, rather than, in a way, deny it or make it disappear. And then the second thing was that the next day or two, they contacted the ADL, and the ADL did what the ADL always did in those days, which was bring a Holocaust survivor to speak to the kids. So the Holocaust survivor was probably, was a woman, I think in her mid to late 90s. And I was very curious. I was actually thinking of turning this into a piece. I went up to the kids afterwards and I said, what did you take away from the speech? And of course I didn't ask my kids, and I tried to avoid the Jewish kids. I went to mostly to the non-Jewish kids, and they said, we couldn't believe somebody so old could still walk and talk. It was really, really sad to me on several levels. This is before Darrell Horn came out with her remarkable book, People Love Dead Jews. And I found myself, after being sad, incredibly furious. Why would you bring somebody whose story is so distant from a group of junior high school or elementary school kids that they would have to kind of rewind their time to something several decades away from them on a different continent, a story about people who killed a lot of Jews. And so you have to hate the swastika, you have to hate anti-Semitism because those dead people require that you have sympathy for them. Well, it seemed profoundly wrong to me that we have to resort to the dead in order to convince the living of why and what it is that they have done wrong or ought not to happen. And from that point on, I began to see, and this is sort of the place where I bring Iran into it, that I thought that these American Jews, you guys, with whom I feel from time to time that I'm one of you, but then you do silly things and I feel like I'm not one of you.
Silly American things.
Silly American things, and the silly American Jewish things, which I'm coming to. Despite all the political, social influence that you have gathered over the decades and over the years that you've lived here, and in some fundamental ways, you still behave exactly like the Jews of Iran who were living under a tyrannical anti-Semitic regime. That in ways that I thought, American Jews, they have power and they have influence and they're the open Jews, they're the Jews who are not afraid. But then I realized after the foot incident, there is a second foot incident which I'll happily share, are in some ways behaving exactly like my father and people I knew, Jews I knew in Iran, were behaving. And that started to really both feel like a huge piece of insight, but at the same time, it really shook me deeply.
So, what did you think, to put a finer point on it, what did you think or did you hope would happen in an incident like that the Jewish community and the school community fell short of?
Okay, great. So that takes me to my second foot story. The second foot story has to do with the fact that there were lots and lots of, celebrations of histories and communities throughout the time that my kids were going to foot. And of course, you all have to realize that I didn't grow up here. So in some ways, I was experiencing elementary school, kindergarten, junior high school, along with my kids, because I was trying to see, how do they do things? How is this done in America? And And so, it was amazing. There would be a, Spanish Heritage Week and African American Heritage Week and this one and that one. There were all sorts of things. And then they would be assigned readings on Spanish community and African American community and Asian American community and this one and that one. When it came time to read about the Jewish community, it was about the Holocaust. Now, I have to say that I don't come to the synagogue because I feel like I owe it to my parents or grandparents. I come to the synagogue because I love being here. I love being among you guys. I love seeing my rabbi. I love hearing the songs. I love, going to Kiddush with people I would want to see on a daily basis but can't afford to, but run into over lunch. I love being here. I don't do it out of guilt. I don't do it because, my grandparents died in some tragedy and therefore I need to keep something up. I do it because it's a joy. Because, for most weeks, it's the best part of my week. And following the same logic, I don't know why, when we want to educate anybody about Jews and Judaism, we should go to the one story that it's about the most tragic, gut-wrenching tale about a people with 4,000 years of history and countless books. And a very rich heritage. So that made me realize that the only times that, whether it's about educating them why a swastika is a bad thing, or whether it's about celebrating the Jewish heritage, the only place where we have to go is to this place of doom. And then in other places where we could have, in fact, a presentation, we were absent. For instance, I was working on my most recent book, which is A Beginner's Guide to America for the Immigrant and the Curious, which is a look at, immigration and immigrants in America. And so I was going back and reading a lot about the history of immigrants in America, who came when, what happened to them, from the beginning of time, which is the American Revolution. And I came across, reading about the American Revolution, something that we have discussed, about Jews who were really hugely invested in the American Revolution, including Chaim Salomon. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, oh my God, I know about George Washington, I know about Jefferson, I know about Adams, I know about this one, I know about Sacagawea, I know about this one, and my kids knew about Lafayette. There would be an early America Day at Foot School, and kids would be dressed as, Sacagawea and Lafayette and Adams and, the traders and this one and that one.
A lot of Hamilton these days.
A lot of Hamilton? No Chaim Solomon? Not the guy who, by, not just by one account, but by many accounts, was the main financial backer of the American Revolution. And I was stunned that a school like Foot, that was exercising so much diversity, equity, inclusion, was going out of its way to make sure that all histories and stories are included. Why wouldn't Chaim Solomon be part of the story of early America? And he's one of many, So I began to see that two things, that if there was a discussion about Jews and the place of Jews, it was about the dead Jews. And number two, in places where living Jews or Jews with huge contributions to the American history, to the American culture, could have had a place, they are somehow absent. And you guys, you American Jews, were okay with it. And my question was, why? Because the fact that you were okay with it is exactly like the absent Jews of Iran who were okay with the idea of being absent from the social scene. By absent, I mean making themselves blend in with the public decor, making themselves disappear into the background so they wouldn't be seen, so they wouldn't be picked on. And what was puzzling me was that why are American Jews in that way behaving exactly like those Jews who had every reason to want to make themselves invisible? And I think that brings us to today's anti-Semitism. That if we didn't fight for our own place, if we didn't insist on injecting our own presence, living presence, into the history, culture, tradition of America, then when the anti-Semites arrive to try to erase us, we have no excuse because we have been erasing ourselves. We have not been insisting on in our own presence for a very long time. Now, because I'm saying you American Jews, so you can correct me, you can say where I'm going wrong, am I?
Well, during the Q&A, which will come up very soon, I hope there are a lot of correctives if people feel that they're required. Before we get to the post-October 7th world, when you were experiencing these incidents at your children's elementary school, I imagine you raised them with administration. I also imagine you raised them with other parents, in particular probably Jewish parents. Mm-hmm. How did that go? Mm-hmm.
Here's the response I got. So I went to have coffee with the school's principal, with Carol. And so I said, what did you do? And she said, well, we contacted the ADL, and they had this program, and the program was the Holocaust survivor speaking to the kids, and then, some other handout by the ADL, and then some community discussion about how everybody felt, the staff of the school and the students, about seeing the swastika. So at that point, I recognized two things. One is that the only thing we knew to do was to contact ADL. That, ADL was and perhaps continues to be the singular universal solution for how to respond to anti-Semitism. And that's a lot to ask an organization to do. And then the other thing is that, nobody else was prepared to confront this because those people we could rely on, including the school principal, had been okay or unaware of the fact that the Jewish presence within the school narrative from, kindergarten up, was non-existent. The Jewish presence meaning, outside of the story of the Holocaust, the Jewish presence, in my view, like the story of, Sandy Koufax and Chaim Solomon and, all the contributions that Jews had made. None of those existed. And the only history that existed was the sad history of the Holocaust. So if the school, so this is the sort of the second answer, that everybody had gotten used to resorting to the Holocaust as the solution for all the Jewish anti-Semitic problems. Mm-hmm. And therefore, everything else about the Jews and about their contributions over the decades and centuries in America was lost, and everyone was okay with that.
Including, I guess, generations of parents at the school, it would seem.
Yeah.
So do you have a theory? I mean, before we move to the post-October 7th world, as you're going through all this and as you're feeling these frustrations and bumping up against the sort of something that we American Jews know well, which is the endless outsourcing of parts of our narrative to the ADL and to Holocaust survivors, who of course won't be around much longer and can only do so much work and could only ever do so much work, right? I mean, we were always asking, I think, more of survivors than they could rightly be asked to do. Did you have a theory of what was going on here? Because you immigrated here when you were 19, and you know, fleeing the Islamic Revolution in Iran, and you had an idea, as you've told us, about what American Jews were going to be like, which is they wouldn't have to be closeted, right? I mean, they wouldn't. No one was coming to kill them, and then in some ways this was an experience of feeling let down. Do you have a theory of what's going on with us? If you were to put us on the analyst's sofa, like, what do you think's going on? Because we're not at risk of being, you know, imprisoned by the state for our practice and things like that.
I think you guys mistook success for the absence of anti-Semitism forever. You guys mistook wherever you rose to socially, and you know, in the ladder of achievement, whatever that achievement in your view had to be, mistook your own success for, you know, all the other social forces that have always been at work throughout history. And in some ways, you continue to be the same Jews of all history. The invisible Jews who think that the best way to live in a society is by blending in and not sticking out and ingratiating the host country, the majority community. And because you were successful, you thought that this is the way to be. Whereas this was the way to be among all the other Jews who, to whom America was a promised land. And if you continue to behave in the same way, and since you continue to behave like those other Jews and not insist on being visible, and by being visible, I don't just mean wearing a yarmulke on the street or putting a Magen David around your neck. I mean, you know, going through the school curriculum of your kids and saying, where are the stories of the living Jews? Or, you know, having a Jewish day parade where it isn't just about Israel or it isn't just about the Holocaust, but something else. Like, we have great holidays, by the way, and, you know, this is what we eat, and why aren't we passing Hamantaschen around on, you know, the Jewish day parade? These things don't exist because your argument with the majority community about Judaism has either been Israel or Holocaust, and not the Jewish experience itself. And I think that, plus the fact that you continued, perhaps this is within all of our DNA, to behave like Jews who just don't want to not look like everybody else, or impose something, any demands of themselves upon the bigger society. That's what made it easy for other people to begin to erase you.
The writer Josh Leifer has a new book out in which he quotes Irving Howe's line, something to the effect of, Israel and Zionism, one might add the Holocaust, allowed American Jews to defer a reckoning with their own Judaism that otherwise America would have forced on them. In other words, they could tell themselves, we could tell ourselves, we haven't given up our Judaism or our identity or any of it because we're buying Israel bonds, because we're commemorating the Holocaust, that sort of began to supplant or replace an actual striving for some sort of meaningful, thick Jewish identity.
Right,
I think.
exactly.
Yeah.
So I'll just tell one more story and then I'll stop.
At least one, please.
At least one.
Yeah.
Many of you remember the Perrys who were on a sabbatical here at Yale, and they belonged to our shul for the time that they spent here. And
they were Israeli
they
academics.
were Israeli academics. And so we spent a lot of time with them and became very close. And one day when they were with us, one of my neighbors who knew that they were from Israel and knew that they were highly observant said, why don't you guys come over to dinner to ours? I really want to speak about something very important with you. This is 7, 8 years ago.
Oh no.
So we all go to this wonderful home of my Jewish neighbors. And we have our dinner, and when dinner is over, the host says, now we have to understand, we've had dinner, we've finished dessert, and the hour of the serious conversation has come, so we're all sitting around this table knowing that it's coming, right?
Because they've warned you, we're having the Perrys over to talk important.
Right, the real Jews
Right.
from Israel who are very observant. And so the host says, she has a very, very somber face, really, almost tears in her eyes. And she says, I have to tell you that I have relatives who perished in the Holocaust. Very many of my relatives have perished in the Holocaust. I think about them often, and I think about the fact that despite the fact that I have these relatives and this history bearing on me, I am not a practicing Jew. I don't go to the synagogue, I don't keep kosher, I don't keep Shabbat. This is who I am now, and I feel awful. And what should I do? Right? Or, maybe not what should I do, but, this is where I am, and, my dead relatives, the Holocaust, and me, an assimilated American who wants nothing to do with the Jews. So, this isn't funny, because it was really a very, very quiet, dead silence. And I'm looking down because I'm thinking, I have no idea what to say. A couple of other people were looking down, and then suddenly Micha, who is sort of the scholar, the historian, one of the real Jews, who's also looking down like the rest of us, raises his head and says, don't worry about it. I said, what? He said, don't worry about it. And I said, we were waiting for something really profound, like for Micha to say, let's get going, according to Parsha this, and the Mishnah said that, and, we gotta go to shul, and if we don't, something terrible is gonna happen to your children and great-grandchildren, because nothing. He just said, don't worry about it. It took me a few seconds, but then I realized, and I had spoken to him enough to know, this is a gift that we have. This fantastic tradition that is rooted in thousands of years of history. We come to the synagogue. I'm getting goosebumps even when I talk about it, and I've talked about it 1,000 times. And we basically come to the world's longest living book club of all time. It's true that we read the same book over and over again.
I always say that, and now I don't know, did I get that from you?
I don't know.
I've been saying the World Oldest Book Club for like 10 years. I think I stole it from you.
Did you? No, maybe I stole it from you.
I don't know.
But I don't mind you stealing from me, and
we'll both
it's
use
fine.
it. Yeah.
And it isn't, okay, I have a second joke. I always say, I wish I'd written it, but that's okay. It's not my book, but that's okay.
Yeah. Sold better than mine and yours put together.
Yeah. And, the other thing that I guess you guys who were born and raised here don't recognize is that when we walk into the synagogue, we can't tell who is the rabbi. He looks like exactly like the rest of us, meaning that the importance of his presence isn't on his individuality. It's on the ideas that we're discussing. It's on the parsha or the passage that we're reading. It's not about him. We're not here to worship him. We're not here to celebrate him. We're here to celebrate whatever it is that he is reciting, and that's not what happens in other places of worship. We get up when the ark is open. We don't get up because the rabbi commands it. We don't get up because the rabbi rises from his seat. We get up because the book is in view. We walk into shul for every holiday, and there's somebody at the door who's handing us a book. They're not, we're not here to just go eat and, have a bunch of drinks, although we do plenty of that too. But our job, whether it's at the Seder or Purim or whatever, our job is to go through a book from the beginning to the end. Now, where else in the world could you ever get such a good deal as something that you would have to observe? Or, and I was thinking, if you don't want to come to shul every Saturday, what else are you going to do? Go to the mall? How else are you going to see some of the people you really enjoy chatting with, but don't get to otherwise, over a meal that, your fellow congregants have put together? I just think that the fact that we have been focused on two things, Israel, Holocaust, has really eclipsed all the other magnificent things that are going on that should really shake all of us up as being fundamentally crucial and important. I'll give you one more example, and then I'll really shut up. When I was a child, my school calendar rotated around the birth or the death of a prophet and 12 other saints. Now, 365 days, one prophet, 12 imams. They die, 12 days. They're born, 12 days. Sometimes they're wounded, that's one day, and then it takes a few days to die. So then there's those in-between days until they die. Now, what does that do to your sense of time and calendar? It makes you think that nothing else matters but these people who have populated your days, right? Whether they die or are born. That the entire calendar rotates around individuals, and these individuals who you actually have no sense of, other than the fact that they were they got sick and they died, or there isn't maybe with a couple of them there's a more hefty narrative, but with the majority of them they remain unknown because there are so many. But compare that to a calendar where the birth or death of the individual is immaterial, that your celebrations are entirely based on the story of the community, which means that you don't have to worry about what the individual did because you're part of something much larger. And that gives you the hope, the vision that you alone don't have to do it all, that if you fit yourself within this body of other people, that you can together lift and then perhaps do something monumental enough to be a day on the calendar. And I think these are the things that, they appear small, but they fundamentally shape us in a way that makes us incredibly unique and, in my view, wonderful.
So then, just to quickly, before we turn to the audience for any questions, we briefly alluded to all that happened really in the past year. We're coming up on the anniversary of October 7th. And you and I happen to have between us 3 freshman-aged children. Your twins have started college. My daughter's of that age and starting next year. So we have a lot of skin in the game. We've been paying close attention. What was your thinking as you saw the protests on college campuses, the counter-protests, the alumni threatening to yank money, the congressional hearings? I mean, did your sense of American Jews' sense of themselves, your disappointment in them before October 7th, did that in any way come back or haunt you afterwards? Do you think that they're connected in some way?
Well, I really think that you guys, you're not responsible for anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism has existed. But I think you were remiss. You lived in a society that insisted on multiculturalism and celebrating the heritage of every Tom, Dick, and Harry. And you let your heritage dwindle down to the story of the Holocaust. And you somehow thought that if this singular central story is told, then you're good. That the Jewish heritage is intact or known and all that. And I think the story of the Holocaust is incredibly important, but it's not our singular story.
And of course nobody talked about it until a good decade after the war was over. People didn't want to talk about it. And then of course it began being talked about, and in the 70s and 80s and 90s you have just a profusion of literature and film and documentaries and movies and about it. And we're only 75 years removed from it, give or take. So maybe it's too much to ask. I mean, there was a lot of work to be done, including remembering the Holocaust.
Right.
And maybe the thing to say is like, well, there's other work that we've been.
Yeah. I mean, I say you, but me. I mean, I'm trying to get your goats.
Right.
But yes, there is so much here that we are aware of, but somehow we've thought that we don't have to shove it in other people's faces. Well, we're the ones who show up for all the other, celebration of everybody else's heritage. So why should we be so conspicuous about our own? These things haven't served us, and I think this is a whole different conversation, but I think a lot of the Hebrew day schools really didn't prepare our children who are going to college now this year, unprepared for what will come at them.
Do you think your sons are prepared?
My sons went to college with a flag of Israel each, and over these past 4 or 5 years, one of the things that I have greatly regretted is that with the bar mitzvah, their formal Jewish education ended. So what I tried to do, successfully or unsuccessfully, I'm not sure, I made sure that every Shabbat evening we study, something, a book. Oftentimes I, read from Heschel's books, the Shabbat book or something. But I made sure that we continue the conversation. So God forbid that they think that whatever they learned was enough. And leave them with the notion that no matter how much you learn, there's still so much more that we have to learn. And then, every time I learned something new, I made sure to pass it on. You know, I got into the story of the fall of the Second Temple, for instance, and the story of, you know, how the entire Jewish tradition, worship, was all transformed as a result of a tragedy. And then, you know, we who should have been extinct 10 times over ended up surviving because of the genius of one and a group of people who followed him. And, you know, Yochanan ben Zakkai, you know, the guy decides that, you know, we don't have to sacrifice in the temple. We can, you know, anybody can worship. And these are all the things that other people ended up doing until, you know, the 15th, 16th century in Europe, you know, the Great Reform. We did it after the fall of the Second Temple and, you know, created a direct relationship between worshiper and God, right? So I made sure that when I studied something that really excited me, to get them just as excited. And so I think when they went, they were prepared. And they were also prepared for, you know, all the discussions around colonialism, Israel as an apartheid state, Israel as a colonial state, you know, because we had discussed the history so much. So to the degree that they could have been prepared, they are, I think.
So they'll come give this talk next year and tell us how things really are on the ground. Any questions for Roya?
So when my daughter Eva was 7, 32 years ago, she went to West Hills Public School in New Haven. And it was February, it was Black History Month. And she came home and said, "It's too bad Jews never did anything important." You know? So, I mean, how do you think we could best contribute to the curriculum in public and private schools to highlight achievements, the vast achievements of Jews in this country and around the world?
Too bad. The only thing we did was to die, right? In big numbers. Exactly. So, I mean, ever since my own kids' experience at elementary, junior high, and high school, I really think that now is the time to overhaul whatever Jewish narrative exists from K to 12. It really needs a fundamental makeover. Because what I saw, and maybe at public school yours didn't see anything, was the story of the Holocaust. And in every other place where Jews could have naturally, most authentically, have had a place, they were invisible. And that's where I think you guys behaved exactly like how my father behaved 80 years ago in his village in Iran. You know, that when they walked by and, you know, said, there are no Jews here, or, you know, they're so good we can never see them, they were okay with that. They were happy. And so you ended up behaving in the same way. And so part of the lesson to take away is to realize that unless you insist, unless we all insist on being visible and present in all of our beautiful, joyous celebrations and complexities of our heritage, then we are behaving in the same exact way as our predecessors in those other places where they were mistreated or treated as dhimmis. And unless we make ourselves visible, then those who take up their erasers and say Jews won't replace us are doing what we have made space for to be done.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting that, you know, the ADL does have curricula, but they're Holocaust curricula, right? Like, I actually don't know if there are any competent curricula about Jewish life and times meant for elementary school students, for public school students, right? Because you would have to teach it somewhat differently in public schools than in private schools for understandable reasons. But I actually don't know, and that's shocking. Do we have time for 2 more questions? Because then I think we're halakhically required to go eat, to buy books and eat. Are there a couple more questions, Rebecca? Yeah.
Thank you, and I really appreciate all of your comments. I'd like to hear you talk about the interplay between the degree to which we talk about ourselves and our place in the country and the degree to which we actually reach out and act. I remember as a kid hearing an awful lot about Abraham Joshua Heschel marching with Martin Luther King and about the Zionist Jews who founded Israel and were looking to create peaceful relationships. And I wonder, I remember Elie Wiesel saying, do what you do, but do it as a Jew. Get out there and volunteer and be involved in the community and do it openly and proudly as a Jew. And somehow I feel like on several levels and for many reasons, some of those kinds of role models and actions, not just talking about it, but the actions of people very publicly joining marches as Jews has shifted in some way. And I wonder if and Israel's behavior has shifted, obviously, for many complex reasons. Is there a way that you can comment on some of that and how it might affect?
I can. May I?
Do, yeah.
I'm excited to say this because nobody's going to like it. I suggest putting "V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha." I suggest putting doing healing the world. What do we say?
Tikkun Olam.
Tikkun
yeah.
Olam. I suggest putting Tikkun Olam on ice for the next 10 years. You've done enough Tikkun for enough Olam. No more Tikkun Olaming for the next 5 years. There is a moratorium on Tikkun Olam. The reason I say this is because I find that so many of you, again, I'm really doing this I think, because I want you to see me at the moment as someone who's lived in another place where those Jews and you should bear no resemblance, but God, there is resemblance between you and them. You have to stop ingratiating the majority community. You have to stop trying to appease and please. Done. You've done it enough. Enough, Habitat for Humanity, enough this. I'm not saying forever. I'm just saying 5 years. And enough pleasing others. There's a lot to do within our own. Why are our children stopping to learn more about Judaism and Jewish history, Jewish education, after they reach the age of 12 and 13? Create a new synagogue curriculum, bring them all in, get them engaged. They're not done. You know they're not done. I know they're not done. So why are we pretending like that's the end? That should only be the beginning. So you want to do Tikkun Olam? Bring the kids in on other days, get them engaged, create a new curriculum for them. Make sure to go out and build a new museum about Jewish contributions to American comedy, Jewish contributions to early American history, American Revolution, Jewish contributions to American sports, baseball. Where are these stories? Why aren't they included in the education that our kids are receiving K through 12? You were so worried about Tikkun Olaming that you lost sight of the places where your own presence was being erased. And so, while anti-Semitism is not a problem that you or I created, it's a problem to the degree that we could have foreseen and been ready and present for it.
To be fair, that wouldn't make the anti-Semites go away. Right?
No, not at all. But it would have reoriented us to who we are.
You're saying it would have added resilience.
Not only resilience, but it would have made us united, more of a community. You know how many people have have invited me to go to their synagogues or Jewish centers just to say, oh, you know, I'm one of the Jews who really suffered, so I know Jewish suffering can happen. I mean, I don't mind doing that from time to time, but really?
You should charge higher rates depending on how much you talk about your suffering.
Right.
Your honorary goes up for extra suffering.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, is that? Oh, first of all, I hope you know that that's not all I can bring. But aside from that, are the stories of suffering the only stories that can keep us as a people?
And there are those surveys that show that when they ask people to rank what's important to them in their Jewish identity, that Holocaust always comes out on top, which is so.
And I'm now the replacement for Holocaust. You know, they say, oh, you know, Holocaust happened 70 years ago, but Roya's alive, and you know, so we're going to put her in front of the camera.
Oh,
you know?
I feel so bad for you. I'm so sorry.
No. I mean, that's not the point, right?
No, I know that's not the point.
The point is that why do we think that we can justify our existence as long as we can justify our suffering?
It's precisely because I don't see you as that victim that it never would have occurred to me that people were trotting you out as their token victim.
Right.
Is there a final question for Roya before we eat? Yeah, Shoshana, you organized our event today, so you definitely get the last question.
Well,
Louder.
can we do this one and then she can take it out?
Thank you. I just wanted, cold close. Okay, I just wanted to say that the entire reckoning since October 7th has caused me to rethink my being Jewish. And one thing that has helped, and it's maybe rooted in my Jewish education, which went through high school and college, but is that I'm a part of a nation state. And it's more than just a religion, but it's in fact that I've been exiled. My people have been exiled. It didn't, and for some magical reason, we didn't all fade away into nothing, probably because we all need each other to survive. We need a butcher, we need a synagogue, we need all sorts of things like that. And so in being a nation state, that's how I've tried to counter the idea of colonialism with my college students, and also I've said that, well, you've got the Irish, you've got the Jewish, and so that's how I go about when I see people who don't look like me but could have been looking like me a couple of thousand years ago. I mean, via my exile into Russia and Ukraine. So that's how I can deal with that now. I mean, it's more than religion, it's people. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted your comment on that.
Thank you.
I have no comment, exactly.
You assent.
Yeah, I mean, it's a history.
All right, Mike, what do you want us to do now?
Yeah.
You talked about us needing to be unified. That is a problem. And maybe we need to trade Tikkun Olam for understanding one another. I mean, I'm talking about different kinds of Jews around the world, in our country, in our communities. We are not really a united people. Mm-hmm. And that's been a problem in America and in other places, I imagine as well. I don't know what the solution is to that, but I do think that you hit on something that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
We're fighting with each other. We are not standing up together necessarily.
Because we're looking outward all the time. That we're trying to please. We have a friend, Sarah Horowitz, whose first book, was Here All Along. Beautiful book about discovering her Jewishness in adulthood after serving as a speechwriter in the Obama White House. Her second book, which I'm really looking forward to, and I'm giving it a plug even before it's published, is on how the experience of Christianity has defined the practice of Judaism in this country. Now, Sarah will give you all sort of the historical backdrop, but what I'm telling you is that, you know, the first time I went to a Reform synagogue that I had never been to, you know, people always ask me, what kind of Jew were you in Iran? Were you a Reconstructionist, a Reform, this? There were only one kind of Jew in Iran, and that was me, and I don't know what we were, but we were. But so these are the luxuries of a democratic society that's basically defining itself based on the majority society's games, right? So when I facetiously say, put Tikkun Olam on ice, I'm basically saying, we don't have to please, stop pleasing. We don't have to ingratiate ourselves. We have every right to be who we are, do what we're doing, and insist on our place. We don't have to resort to the dead in order to explain why we live and deserve to. And these are the things that we've had to do based on our DNA configuration, because this is how we have survived and responded to all pressures like this in the past. But I really do think we have to lower the flame on the anxiety we've had about what we can do for other people and begin to really cultivate and take care of our own communities, starting with overhauling synagogue education and then K through 12 education. I have, one of the things that I don't think I've told you is that, I have proposed to do a series of books about Jewish contribution to early American Revolution. I did one thing on Chaim Solomon, and I hope to do others, which will be sort of graphic novels, I hope. But these things are essential. Why aren't we, part of that narrative? It has to change.
So I just want to say that for all of Roya's taking us to task, she of course is herself an American and has written one of the great books on becoming American, which is for sale along with other works of hers, and I think is one of the great sort of poets about what's great about the country. So I just want to thank her and thank all of you.
Thank you.
So.
Thank you.
You bet.
That was wonderful. Thank you.